sure, pretty much regardless of what year it is, because most of the Gospels have this story in it, and they actually have it placed in the same part of most of the Gospels. And the reason for that is that when you start your Lenten journey, which hopefully you started on Ash Wednesday, sort of trying to figure out how is it you could build a better relationship with Christ, right? That's the goal of Lent. Build a better relationship with Christ, okay? Maybe that's giving up something, maybe that's taking something new on. Nothing tastes as good as a human than a cheeseburger approximately a week and a half or half a week after you start a diet, right? The same thing is true with any Lenten discipline. That at about this time, a few days later, everyone's like, man, well, you know what I need? That thing I gave up. Or you know what I want to stop doing? That thing I took on. This is true of Jesus' journey too. What he had just done is he had started his ministry, got baptized, and then he heads out. And here comes the devil with temptation. Now, whenever you talk about temptation, we have been so conditioned to frame it in a very particular way into some version of having issues with delayed gratification, right? When we think about temptation, we think about someone who wants something, so they steal it, right? Or I want something, so I do the thing I shouldn't, or I do something wrong to get the thing I want, right? Sort of a delayed gratification territory. I do something immoral to get something, and which may itself be immoral, but it also might not be immoral, because there's nothing immoral about the M&Ms you stole, but there is something immoral about stealing them, right? And this is how most times Christianity has framed temptation. And while that is definitely a type of temptation, and people do struggle with those types of temptations from time to time, if you don't believe me, go Google the marshmallow experiment, which is where they take a marshmallow and put it in front of a child and say, if you can sit there and stare at the marshmallow for the next 10 minutes without eating it, I'll give you a second one. You have 2. Yeah, that's hard. By the way, generations are getting better at that, just noting. But we frame it so heavily in that for understandable reasons because it's easy to understand and it's a temptation that most people can relate to. But there's a problem in over-framing temptation that way because there are temptations that lie outside of delayed gratification issues, right? Most of us have probably, hopefully this week at least, not stolen anything. We've hopefully not had any affairs this week. We've hopefully not done any of these other delayed gratification issues this week, right? I'm just going to pretend you all said yes enthusiastically because now I'm really worried about you all because I was like, right, and everyone looked at their feet. Okay, and I'm like, okay, maybe I'm wrong. Okay? But if you go and you say, yeah, I'm good at that, and a lot of us are good at that, you can get into a really dangerous place of self-righteousness where you're like, well, I don't steal things. I don't do these things. I fulfill all the laws. You know that rich young ruler who talked to Jesus? And Jesus says, really, you do. Let's try some of the other types of temptations. So the devil goes, end your fast that the Holy Spirit has you on there, Jesus. He's like, no. The devil's like, man, this is harder than I thought. That's right, I got more tricks in the bag. So then the second temptation comes. He takes Jesus and he shows him in an instant all the power, all the authorities of all the kingdoms of all the world and says to him, if you bow down to me, all this could be yours. 2 things to note, just side notes that I have issues with this about. First thing, if you're ever going to make a deal with the devil, do not pay up front. Be wary of things like could. Like, I could build you a deck for $10,000. Anyone take me on for that? Especially if you pay me up front. Right? That aside, there's another big issue. He's not actually offering a bad thing, right? Authority and kingdoms and stuff like that, those aren't in and of themselves bad. Okay? But he's trying to say, but to get it, you've got to make your life about mine. You've got to worship me. I need to be your God. That's what's wrong. Right? Because that's what Jesus responds. He says, I'm only supposed to worship God, not you. In our own lives, in our own ways. This is a temptation all of us deal with at one point or another. I'll give you an example, probably the most common example, but there's others I could use. The most common example is ambition. Ambition is good, right? It's good to be ambitious. It's good to want to go out there and have a good career. It's good to want to provide for your family. It's good to go out there and say, like, this is part of who I am and this is fulfilling to me. Ambition itself is not bad. It is in fact a virtue. But as Pope Gregory taught us, any virtue could become a vice if not monitored. For example, ambition is virtuous. But if your job becomes your God, where all you live for is that job, that's not okay. That's how people don't get to know their own children. That's how people don't get to know their own grandchildren. That's how people don't know how to retire because they have nothing else to live for. And they can spend their entire life worshiping the next pay raise, the next little bit of fame, the next promotion, and miss out on all the reasons one lives. And yeah, you might get a ton of authority. You might get a whole bunch of money. And yeah, you might get some fame. And yeah, you might have all sorts of stuff. But all those things are things of the world, not things eternal. They're treasures on earth where, moth and rust and thieves, not eternal things. You give up your entire life to gain the whole world, but have no life. What is it worth? That's the temptation the devil's offering. It's temptation of taking your virtue and turning it into a vice. That doesn't work either. The devil's very disappointed in that. He tried really good. All the kingdoms of the world, that's pretty tempting. Then he comes up with what I think is the hardest one for us to get our minds around, a really bizarre one, right? If you really think through what's going on here, it's hard to get. Basically what he does is he takes Jesus, he puts him at the pinnacle of the temple in Jerusalem. And he says to Jesus, hey, if you're the Son of God, jump off the top. If you jump off the top, you know that the Bible says the angels will catch you because it is not your time to die. And they will gently land you on the ground. Now the world will see these angels, right? Temple is where the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and the Sanhedrin meet. It is not physically far from where Herod lives, nor is it physically far from where Pilate spends most of his time. So all those people who are going to kill you will learn today you're the Messiah. Guess what's not going to happen? You ain't going to die. Doesn't my plan, if you're Jesus, sound a heck of a lot better than your dad's plan where you're tortured to death? They'll all convert. They'll believe in you. It's a much better way to get to the ends you want. The catch that's not spoken by the devil, in case you're sitting there going, okay, the devil's plan seems great, is if Jesus had done that, he for surely would not have died. The devil would have been absolutely right. The angels would have caught him and would have let get him to the ground. He would have been safe. All those people would have converted. And guess what they never would have done? They never would have killed him. They never killed him, there would be no cross. If there's no cross, there's no forgiveness of sins. If there's no forgiveness of sins, we are all in trouble. That's the plan. That's the unspoken part from the devil. This is a type of temptation that lives very well in people's lives, and people don't see it. It's a temptation where something starts off as good and noble. Maybe the ends are. And while you don't lose the ends like in temptation 2, you get tempted to take means that are not okay. You get tempted to cut a corner or to shove someone to the side or to leave bodies in your wake when you didn't need to, when you didn't have to, because it got you there faster or purer or whatever you're looking for. And that sort of thing is dangerous and is its own type of sin. I'll give you an example, because examples, I think, explain things to folks, and I do love telling examples of my high school exploits. So, me in high school, I was definitely in the freak, geek, and nerd territory. I know that comes as a great surprise to everyone in this room. I was not one of the popular kids. So the way things worked at Madison High School in San Antonio, Texas was very simple. If you were the star quarterback, you were also the president of student body. If you were dating the star quarterback, you were the vice president of the student body, and you were also the head cheerleader. This is how things worked, and then it worked out from there. Okay? All these people who were staffing these student government roles were very predictably in the hierarchy of the Queen's Court and all that sort of stuff. And you were also on the football team because it is Texas, and if you don't believe me, watch Friday Night Lights. That is very real. Okay? And this is how it works. And you are a good, upstanding guy the way Friday Night Lights would have understood that. If you don't know the TV show, watch that or Varsity Blues. That will give you an understanding of what I mean by upstanding in Texas terminology. Okay? So I come in as a freshman, and I realize we have a multi-party democracy. It's like Europe in how the elections go. Because I always loved causing chaos, I created my own political party. It was a nonsense thing. I patched together stuff from the far right, far left, so no one knew what the heck we were actually about. And I launched this political party, and our whole goal was to go ahead and get the most undesirable students in high school elected to student government. So in my freshman year, we made 20%, which won us 1 seat. So we found the sort of kid that all the teachers and the administration truly hated and made him our one rep. It was fun for about 3 days, and then they impeached him for no apparent reason because they didn't want him there. So they got rid of him. Well, this made us mad, but also gave us something to talk about to all the other students. Like, you might not agree with our positions on things, but aren't you mad about this? Be mad with me. Okay? So the next round, my sophomore year, they've changed it to a first-past-the-post system, meaning all you have to do is get the most votes. So this idea of us getting 20% would get us nowhere. Think of a third party in American politics. 20% doesn't get you anything. So they do this, but we figure out that they'd cut up the school into zones, think states, and so we packed all our voters into one of the states and had them vote in that class, which got our guy back onto council until they impeached him 3 days later and got rid of him again. And then my junior year, they switch it again, and they're like, okay, what we're doing now is no more direct democracy, people. What we're going to do is you're going to elect people who are then going to come together, and they will elect the student government. Okay? We're like moving towards like not even, we're less democratic than a caucus system. We're what's called a convention system of election now. We're going to elect like we did before the Constitution. So, we're doing that. But we are smart, and now I got my guy who's been impeached twice with a giant placard going, the would-be president that wasn't allowed, wandering around the school with our little logo that made no sense. It was like a bird eating a scorpion or something. Wandering around doing this, driving the teachers and administration nuts. And so we run them again, and this time what we do is we get enough delegates through sort of telling everyone vote for these people, but we're not going to identify with our party because we know that there are people who will vote against us by the party. So it's sort of ghost candidates, if you know that phenomenon. So we run all these ghost candidates and get all these representatives in there, not enough to really sway things, but enough to elect them president now. Okay? So we elect him president, and then they remove him from the ballot and make us all re-vote. Because they didn't want some goth kid as the face of the school. So then our last final thing was we realized that we could just keep nominating people and they couldn't close nominations if we just filibustered. So we filibustered all the way through lunch until they just disbanded us. Sent us all home. We're like, no more, that's it. And then my senior year, there was no more elections, they just appointed people. Okay. I look back at it, those were fun times. Yay to the 1990s. Nowadays, I'd probably thrown in a police van if I pulled a stunt like that or a high schooler did. But here's the thing. I get what the administration back then was trying to do. They didn't want the school to be embarrassed. They didn't want the school to look bad, and that's a noble thing. It's not good to make your school look bad, no matter what the 16-year-old version of me would have said. But they lost perspective somewhere in there. Because the whole point of student government was teaching like the basics of democracy and the basics of authority and the basics of voting. And had they engaged with us, they easily would have defeated us. We never had more than like 20% of the student population behind us. But because they kept cracking down more and more and kept going to ever more ridiculous means to try to keep us out of the discussion, they kept undermining themselves further and further and further. And my senior class, we totally got the wrong message. Like, think about the message you sent. Think about the poor kid. Like this poor goth kid who kept being impeached for doing nothing just because he was undesirable according to the administration. Like, think about his feelings. Like, I knew him. He was a friend of mine. He felt awful. Like, he was totally willing to do it because we both had fun doing stuff like this. But, like, there was a certain point where he was like, this is starting to hurt. Let alone all the things you missed out on possibly teaching. All the lessons we learned that we shouldn't, and all the lessons we didn't learn that we could have. I get why they're doing it, and I get why there's a certain nobility to where they started, but where they ended was not good. See, there's lots of different types of temptations out there. We all struggle with all of them. Lent is that time where you spend some time in your life, you look back at yourself, over the past year, and you dig down deep and you ask yourself, is there somewhere in my life where any of these temptations, or all of them maybe, are keeping me from the relationship I want with God and with others? Because if they are, that is the exact sort of thing you should give up for Lent.